Yet the rooms felt slightly off-center, like a picture frame nudged a finger's width. I told myself it was nothing, that families are simply noisy in one moment and quiet in the next. I chose to believe in the quiet. "Mom?" Evan's voice resurfaced in memory, or maybe I only wished it would. "Lock the doors." A kettle clicked and made me jump. "Evan, listen to me. Marisol is here. She's wearing the white towel with the blue edge. The bathroom fan is on." Silence stretched. "Mum, I'm looking at her," he said, each syllable heavy. A chime sounded, and the cabin door thunked shut. "We're about to push." "Don't," I said, surprising myself. "Just fly safe." He exhaled. "I will. But Mom, lock the doors." The call ended. The house resumed its hum. The clock ticked in the key of dread. I slid the deadbolt. The click felt ceremonial, like sealing an envelope addressed to a future I hadn't agreed to. Upstairs, the water stopped. The fan purred. I stood with my hand on the rail, waiting for the house to tell me which truth to believe. The phone rang just as I was drying the dishes. My younger son, Evan, a pilot, sounded breathless. "Mom, something strange is happening," he whispered. "My sister-in-law is at the house, right?" I set the phone down and walked to the bottom of the stairs. The air was damp and warm. I could smell soap, jasmine, and a snap of mint. "Marisol?" I called, soft enough that the name might forgive me for doubting it. "I'll be down in a minute," she sang back. The voice was hers, warm, lilting, and yet a stranger's hand seemed to press against the back of my neck. "Yes, she's here," I said, glancing toward the hallway. "She's upstairs taking a shower." There was a long pause. Then his voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "That's impossible. I'm holding her passport. She just boarded my flight to Paris." The door opened with a sigh. She appeared at the landing in a white towel with a blue edge, damp hair roped down her back, eyes clear as glass. "I'm glad you're home," she said, smiling easily, as though a second version of herself weren't slicing the sky above us in seat 2A. I checked the grocery list: tomatoes, cilantro, a fresh white fish if the price was kind, and set a pot to simmer with bay leaves for later. Evan, somewhere between clouds and runways, had texted a tiny plane at sunrise. I pressed my palm to the phone and whispered a blessing for smooth skies. Everything looked ordinary. The dish towel sunning on the chair, the neat row of coffee cups, the pale line of steam rising from the kettle. I took one step up, close enough to see the small scar near her jaw that Evan had named. "Which hand do you write with?" I asked, absurd and desperate. She laughed softly. "Right, mostly." Then she reached past me to the banister, left hand brushing the wood, and for a breath, I felt the world tilt. "Lock the doors when I'm out," she added lightly, as if quoting a thought from inside my skull. "I'll start lunch in a minute." She turned toward the bedroom, leaving a glistening trail of droplets like misplaced commas, and I stood in the hallway trying to decide which truth to believe, the one that smiled at me, or the one streaking west in a metal body 15,000 feet above the roof. A rush of wind, a muffled announcement. Then Evan's voice, lower now, careful like he was stepping across ice. "Mum, that's impossible. I'm holding her passport. The gate agent handed it over after boarding. And I just saw her. She walked down the jet bridge. She's seated in 2A. I stared at the ceiling as if the plaster could explain it. Water sang in the walls. "You're mistaken," I said too quickly. "Maybe it's someone who looks like her." The house exhaled. Clocks ticked. The fridge hummed. A sparrow knocked twice on the window screen like an old friend. From the landing, Marisol called down in that gentle voice, saying she'd take a quick shower before the market. Pipes whispered. Water threaded the silence. Evan caught me between chores and silence. His voice came thin through the line, wind roaring behind him. "I've got a minute before pushback," he said, trying to sound casual and failing. "Tell me Marisol's with you." "She is," I answered, forcing steadiness. "She just went upstairs to shower. I can hear the pipes." "I thought that," he said. So I went down the aisle to double-check. It's her. Same eyes, the little scar near her jaw, hair braided the way she does it when she travels. And he hesitated. She's not alone. There's a man in 2B. Expensive suit. They're whispering. My heart skipped a beat. The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom. I turned, frozen, every hair on my neck rising. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, approaching behind me. When I turned, she was there, smiling calmly as if nothing had happened. "I'm glad you're home," she said softly. But in that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, the deadbolt newly set, listening to the house breathe. The shower hiss softened, then stopped. The fan kept purring like a cat behind the door. Footsteps padded across tile, slow and certain, and the scent of jasmine and mint drifted down the stairwell as if the air itself carried a secret. "Marisol?" I called again, but the name felt fragile in my mouth. "Who took your passport this morning?" I asked, too quickly. Her smile didn't falter. "I left it in my purse." "Why?" A buzz tremored in my hand. "Evan. Wheels up." I turned the screen face down on the rail. "You were at the airport?" I tried to keep my voice calm. It splintered anyway. "No," she said, tucking a strand behind her ear. "Market, then shower. Do you want tomatoes?" Later, while Matthew coloured dinosaurs at the table, I noticed Marisol's pen in her left hand, drifting over a second list she said was for specials at the fish stall. The lines curled and drooped. The spacing wobbled. "Since when do you write with your left?" I asked, casual as I could make it. She laughed lightly. "Practicing ambidexterity, Mama," she said, and kissed Matthew's hair. The word Mama warmed the room the way it always did, but the letters on the paper chilled me, like someone had copied her handwriting from memory and lost a piece of it in the curve. Neighbours, child, shopkeeper. All of them dropping pebbles in the same pond, and the ripples meeting at my feet. I started paying attention to sounds, the rhythm of her steps on the stairs, the cadence of her voice when she called for Matthew, the way the bedroom drawers opened and shut with either a feathered touch or a hasty clatter. On Wednesday, I heard her moving before dawn, soft, deliberate, then found the bed made with hospital corners I had never taught her. On Thursday, she dropped a fork and cursed under her breath in a clipped accent that didn't belong to our house. On Friday, she sang Cielito Lindo, the way I sing it, lingering on the A, I, and I nearly cried from the sweetness. Until by afternoon she snapped at the boy for spilling crumbs, and her mouth hardened into someone else's. The mirror began to tell on us. Some mornings, she tucked her hair in a firm braid that sat sharp as a line. Other mornings, it fell loose and uneven, as though the braid were learned yesterday. A tiny scar near her jaw, which Evan had described from the aisle, hid under a lock of hair some days and shone plain as noon on others, depending on where she parted it. "You changed your part," I ventured. "New brush," she said, breezy, and opened the bread box for crackers. I stood very still. The paperclip inside pressed against the notebook like a heartbeat I didn't want her to hear. I tried to smooth the house back into normal, but normal kept snagging like a thread on a nail. The morning after Evan's call, I watched Marisol move through the kitchen with practiced grace, rinsing cilantro in a wire strainer, tapping water from the stems. She hummed a tune I couldn't place, soft and pleasant. And yet it landed wrong in my ears, a half note shy of the song she usually favoured. She wrote a grocery note on the pad by the phone, her right hand quick and upright, letters crisp, numbers cut like little glass tiles. "Do we need bay leaves?" she asked without looking up. "We have plenty," I said, and slipped the old jar closer to her elbow, as if proximity could anchor the past to the present. At noon, Matthew's teacher sent home a note praising his drawing. "Mama helped with the bird," he said proudly, pointing to a neat line of feathers. "With her right hand. But the numbers page she did lefty and it looked funny." He considered, then added, "Mama hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, but after school she didn't see me at all." He rubbed his chest where the hug had been and went quiet, the way children go quiet when they find a cliff inside themselves. That night, while the house breathed unevenly, I laid my notebook flat and added columns. Right, left, sweet, sharp, sure, unsure. I listed the week's moments, tally marks like fence posts across a pasture I could not cross. I did not write the word double. I did not write second. I wrote only what I could prove. A towel with a blue edge, a fan that purred, the smell of mint, the handwriting that divided itself by noon, the tea saucer migrating like a migrating bird. When I finished, I slid the notebook into the bread box and closed the lid softly, as if putting a child to sleep. The kitchen settled around me, familiar and unrecognizable at the same time, and I stood with my palm on the wood, listening for the house to choose a side. On our walk to the corner store, he practiced whistling, then stopped sudden. "Mama sings the song like you, with the I, he said, brightening. But today she didn't want to sing. She just looked at the window. He made a window with his hands and stared through it, solemn as a saint. "Do windows make you sad, Grandma?" I squeezed his fingers and told him no. It's not the window. It's the weather of the heart. It meant nothing. I repeated those words like prayer beads, but each one slipped away slick with doubt. When the refrigerator hummed, I jumped. When footsteps creaked upstairs, I whispered, "She's just moving about her night." The next morning, I walked to Johnson's bakery for sweet bread. The bell chimed, and the smell of butter lifted the weight in my chest. "Mrs. Brooks?" Mr. Johnson sang, setting a paper bag on the counter. "Your Stephen's wife came early, said my conchas were a miracle." He laughed, then tilted his head. "Funny thing, she came back at noon with a face like thunder, didn't say thank you. Same blouse, I think. Or the same color." He shrugged, then softened. "Maybe she had a hard morning. Happens to the best of us." I pressed my palm to the bag until the paper left a faint grid on my skin and told him he was kind. On the walk home, the bread grew warm against my ribs. The comfort felt borrowed. Matthew became my little weather vane, pointing at shifts I could feel but not name. After school, he spread his notebook on the table, cheeks pink from the bus, and said, "Grandma, Mama wrote my spelling words pretty yesterday." He flipped a page. Today, she wrote fast and wiggly. The first row was tidy, the next a cheerful tumble. "Maybe she was in a hurry," I said, but my voice stepped around the truth like a puddle. He sniffed my apron, the way small children do, then frowned. "You smell like cinnamon. Mama smelled like mint this morning, and like fish when she hugged me after." He whispered the last word, as if the sea itself had followed her home. I pictured Evan threading the aisle, windows flashing morning across his uniform. I pictured the woman in two, bowing her head toward the suited man, their foreheads nearly touching as they shared a secret, but the unease had grown teeth. I thought of the notes hidden in the bread box, the pages filling like slow confessions. "You're imagining things," I said aloud, yet the house didn't believe me. The reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger, an old woman clutching an invisible truth she didn't want. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the night air through it, and wondered when my own home had begun to feel like evidence. Morning slid into the kitchen, and I moved through the routine on muscle memory. Rinse the cups, wipe the table, open the window to let the dry air in. Stephen had left before dawn, with rolled blueprints under his arm, kissing my cheek and promising to be home for dinner. Matthew's backpack thumped down the stairs ahead of him, a comet of energy, 7 years old and bargaining for an extra cookie. We waited by the gate until the bus groaned up the street. He waved so hard his sleeve nearly flew off, and I waved back until the yellow square turned the corner. "Did the red one break?" I asked. "A friend lent me this," she answered, cheerful, unbothered, already washing cilantro. I added a new line to the ledger. 3:00 p.m. Left with red. 4:10. Returned with blue. Route wrong. The pen tip dug a crater in the paper. The kitchen clock applauded each second, like a small, cruel audience. Small things began to glow like coals. She salted soup with a flourish I'd only ever seen on her right. Then at dinner, she lifted the spoon with her left, tilting it awkwardly, so a line of broth slipped back into the bowl. She tied Matthew's shoelaces fast and neat before school, then later fumbled with the same shoes as if the knots were new to her fingers. She set my tea with the saucer to the left of the cup when she had, for years, placed it to the right without thinking. "Long day?" I asked. "A little," she said, eyes sliding away like clouds crossing a sun. Mrs. Collins arrived at dusk with a plate we'd loaned her, the rim floured from a pie. "Stella, dear," she began in her Sunday voice. "Your daughter-in-law is an angel, but yesterday she handed me this with her left hand. You told me she's a righty." She peered past my shoulder toward the hallway and lowered her tone. "And her hair parted the other side. Not that it matters, but it startled me." I laughed too lightly. "She's trying something new," I said. Mrs. Collins traced the plate's edge. "She called me Helen on Monday. Today, she said, Mrs. Collins, very proper, as if we'd never sat gossiping about tomatoes." We stood in the soft hum of the refrigerator until the silence felt like a verdict. I took out a notebook I hadn't used since Raphael died and began to write what I noticed. 7:10 a.m. Right-hand list. Straight lines. Tight loops. 10:35 a.m. Left-hand note. Loose loops. Tilted lines. Noon. Tea saucer to left. 3:00 p.m. Shoelace fumble. 5:45 p.m. Salted soup, right-handed. The act of writing steadied me. The act of reading the lines back unsteadied me more. I started pinning the pages with a paperclip and sliding them into the bread box, as if hiding the list could hide the conclusion it kept nudging me toward. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the clock ticking too loudly, as if measuring my hesitation. The walls that had once held laughter now seemed to listen back. I told myself I was overreacting. Old eyes, old nerves. Young people changed styles, switched hands, forgot manners. The ledger grew busier. Right, left, sweet, sharp, sure, unsure. I added a new column. Present, absent. On one line, spoke to Mrs. Collins. Present, tender. On the next, past Mrs. Collins. Absent, rigid. On another, bread from Johnson's. Present, praise. Then, noon return. Absent, thunder. The check marks marched like ants. I could feel them travelling up the legs of the table. I wrote each thing in my notebook. Mrs. Collins, left hand for plate. Name shift. Helen, Mrs. Collins. Mr. Johnson, 2 visits, 2 moods. Matthew, Right versus left on schoolwork, hug versus hollow. The columns filled like rain gauges. When I lifted my head, I caught Marisol at the sink, face turned toward the window, smiling at something I could not see. Later, the same face would pass me in the hall, polite and distant, as if I were the guest and she the landlord. At school pickup on Monday, Matthew ran into my skirt, waving two worksheets like flags. Mama wrote with her right hand for the bird wings. He beamed. But numbers, she did lefty again. The right-handed feathers were crisp. The left-handed numbers wore little hats of hesitation. She hugged me so tight at lunch I couldn't breathe, he added. And after school she walked past like I was invisible. I folded the papers carefully, the way one folds a map before the road turns. I closed the bread box and laid my palm on its lid. Things fade, she had said. But this was not fading. This was doubling. The house did not feel haunted. It felt overcrowded. Every testimony, child, neighbor, shopkeeper, circled the same drain, and the water level dropped toward a truth I could hear, but not yet name. I tucked the notebook deeper into the bread box, the way you slide a terrified bird back into its cage. Then I turned off the kitchen light and listened to two versions of the same footsteps climb the stairs, one half a beat behind the other. What unstitched me finally was not a flaw, but a flourish. She set my tea down with the saucer on the left and, smiling, tapped the rim twice. A tiny percussion I had never seen her do. "A little good luck drum," she said. An hour later, I found her in the hallway with a different smile, the old one I knew. And when she brought tea, the saucer returned to the right, no tapping, as if the ritual belonged to another mouth that had borrowed her lips. I tried to trap certainty with trivial questions. "Which fish do you buy for roasting?" I asked over the sink. "Whitefish," she said, without looking up. "Any particular stall?" "The one by the oranges." "Our market has no oranges in the fish aisle." I nodded anyway and dried a plate that wasn't wet. From the hallway came the scent of mint. From the laundry, the soap I've used for 20 years. 2 lives, 2 trails, crossing under one roof. "Choose," the house seemed to say. "Choose the peace of pretending, or the storm that names things aloud." "I need you to tell me I'm crazy," I said. Carol didn't touch the book. She looked at me instead. "Start at the beginning." So I did. Red basket to blue, right hand to left. The lullaby, the kettle, the neighbour's plate, the baker's 2 hellos, Matthew's bird wings neat, and his numbers stumbling. I heard myself speaking softly, as if a louder voice might shatter the glass sugar jar. The more I told, the more the coffee smelled like evidence. I opened the notebook at the kitchen table and felt as if I were laying a body on a slab. Each line was a pulse I had captured. Red basket to blue, right to left, honey to vinegar, present to absent. If I kept writing, I feared I would murder the version of Marisol I loved, the one who kissed Matthew's hair and sang my song. If I stopped, the lies could root in the walls. Loyalty tugged my sleeve. Truth pressed a knife to my ribs. I tried to bargain with the air. Maybe grief was bending light. Raphael's voice still in the kettle, time playing its old tricks. But the ledger did not bend. It stacked. I touched the page where I had written doubling and traced the letters until the ink smudged, a bruise on paper. That night, the house staged a quiet argument. The towel on the bathroom hook had a blue edge. The hairbrush on the vanity held strands parted left and right. The perfume on the dresser was turned exactly 90 degrees from its usual stance. In the mirror, I could almost see 2 women passing through the same frame, borrowing each other's outline with imperfect stitching. "You're making shapes in fog," I scolded myself. but the fog kept resolving into faces. The morning after that talk with Carol, the world looked the same, except for me. I opened the curtains and the sun slid in like a question. What if the truth breaks us? I asked. Truth doesn't break what's honest, she said gently. It breaks what's pretending to be whole. She placed her hand on the notebook. Write what happens next, and if you can't write it, follow it. Outside, the fan whirred the same patient circle it has spun for years. Inside me, something locked gave way. I nodded. Then I'll follow. Carol opened the notebook and turned pages with a nurse's calm. This isn't paranoia, Stella, she said at last. This is pattern. She tapped a column with her finger. Present, absent, present, absent. She's flickering. The word flickered too, lighting the space behind my ribs. I keep telling myself it's stress, youth, new habits, I whispered. I keep bargaining with ghosts. That evening, Mrs. Collins phoned to return a jar. Sweetheart, your girl waved today and said, Helen, like always, she murmured. But 20 minutes earlier, I swear she passed me with her nose up, said nothing, and her part was on the other side. I thanked her and set the receiver down beside the bread box, as though proximity could teach objects to witness. The phone rang again. Mr. Johnson from the bakery, chuckling apologetically. I'm not prying, Mrs. Brooks, but your daughter-in-law came twice today. First time she praised my conscience. Second time she looked through me. Same blouse, I think. I wrote both accounts in ink that felt heavier than ink. My hand wavered, then steadied. I wrote a new line. The first that wasn't a detail but a vow. I will follow the truth even if it breaks us. The words didn't fix anything. They only rang in the room like a bell that would not stop. Yet somewhere beneath the ringing, I felt a latch lift. Fear did not leave, but it made room for courage to sit down. I called Carol because the house had started answering me back. Coffee? I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice dragged a chain. She arrived with a canvas bag and that practical smile she wears to funerals and baby showers alike. We chose the corner table under the old ceiling fan where gossip goes to cool. I slid the notebook between us like contraband. On Tuesday, I tested the past. Do you remember the lullaby I sang when Stephen was a boy? I asked. Cielito lindo, she answered instantly, humming the opening. Her voice was warm honey. On Wednesday morning, I tried again. What did Raphael always say about the kettle? She blinked. To keep the whistle. He said it sounded like the house laughing, I whispered, and her smile faltered for a heartbeat before it returned, polished and empty. That night, I couldn't rest. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. Every clock tick sounded like a dare. By Saturday, the house had learned to flinch before I did. Doors sighed, spoons chimed too loudly, and every shadow felt like a misfiled fact. I decided to test reality the way you test a fence, by leaning until it pushes back. At 3 o'clock, Marisol left for the market with her familiar red basket, calling, "Back soon," over her shoulder. I wrote the time in my notebook, then followed at a distance, shawl over my hair, the day bright enough to make doubt squint. She turned not toward the market, but down a side street lined with paint-peeled doors. I slowed near a bicycle rack and watched her slip into an alley, swallowed by shade. I waited. 5 minutes, then 10. A dog barked at nothing. When I finally walked home, rehearsing what I would or wouldn't say, I found her in the kitchen already, face flushed from steam, hair changed into a neat twist, blue blouse instead of the white one I had watched leave. "You're early," she said pleasantly, as if we had changed places while I blinked. I stared at the basket on the table. It was blue. The notebook lay open beside me, filled with notes that no longer felt like coincidences. Tomorrow, I would stop writing and start watching. If the truth was hiding in daylight, I'd drag it out myself. I pictured Marisol leaving again with that wicker basket swinging from her hand, her voice soft, her smile practiced. I circled the block to keep my courage from evaporating. When I reached the front of 14 again, the door was shut and soundless. I lifted a hand to knock and froze. Across the narrow street, through a wavering pane, a woman crossed a small kitchen. Same height, same sweep of hair, same blouse, now the faintest blue. She turned her face toward the window. My breath snagged. Marisol, and not. The smile was almost right, as if sketched from memory. I backed away and hurried home, spine buzzing, the city suddenly too crowded with lookalikes and shadows. The gate clicked behind me. Steam curled from our kettle. In my kitchen, Marisol stood serene, sleeves rolled, cutting cilantro. "You're early," she said, as if reading a script. On the counter sat the wicker basket, no longer straw, but painted blue. I touched the rim. The paint was fresh, tacky as a lie, and when I looked up, her eyes were the color of a question I was no longer willing to ignore. "Ghosts don't sign propane slips," Carol replied, "and children don't invent mismatched hugs." She leaned in. "You already know what this is. What you need is proof you can put on a plate and set at the table." I thought of the alley, the paint-peeled doors, the breathless moment I found Marisol already home, steam curling from a pot that hadn't had time to boil. The room tilted, then steadied on Carol's face. Mrs. Jenkins from the market spotted me as I stepped outside. "Stella, dear, your daughter-in-law came by again, twice in 2 days. Yesterday she was laughing about cilantro. Today she barely said a word." Her tone carried the same confusion that had been haunting me. That evening, Matthew found me sitting at the kitchen table, the blue basket still drying on the counter. "Grandma," he said, his voice thin as thread, "why is Mum so different lately?" His eyes were red, not from tears, but from confusion too old for a child. I smiled too quickly, thanked her, and kept walking, but the words clung to me like burrs. Each person saw a different version of Marisol, and I was the only one trying to stitch them together. By the time I reached the corner, I could almost hear Carol's voice. "You already have witnesses, Stella. Stop doubting yourself." I exhaled, clutching my shawl tighter. Proof was no longer out there. It was closing in, one neighbor at a time. Morning wore a mask of innocence. I tied my shawl, tucked the notebook in my purse, and waited by the lace curtain. At 3:02, Marisol stepped through the gate with her wicker basket, the white blouse bright as a flag. She didn't look back. I slipped out after her, letting the distance breathe, my footsteps stitching themselves to hers. The market was to the right. She turned left. That evening, Evan's text arrived mid-chop. Turned back by weather. Home tomorrow. I stared at the glowing rectangle until the letters blurred into a single white hush. Then I lifted my gaze and saw Marisol watching me watch the phone, her face unreadable in the window's reflection. For a second, no more. I thought I saw the scar on the wrong side of her jaw. She turned. The reflection broke, and the scar was gone. I would follow, not as a mother-in-law, but as a witness. The thought terrified me, yet something inside me straightened, as if my heart had finally found its spine. The kettle clicked in the kitchen, and I took it as a sign. "Tomorrow," I begin. Blocks thinned into alleys, paint peeled from doors like old secrets. She paused at a chipped number, 14, knocked once, then slipped inside. The door swallowed her whole. I felt the air cool, like water over stone. 5 minutes, 10. A boy pedaled past with cards clicking in his spokes. Somewhere, a radio sang a song about love that outlives names. I went back to the alley at noon, when secrets pretend to be shadows cast by honest sun. Number 14 waited with its blistered paint and a daisy wilting on the sill. I carried our family photo in my purse like a passport to a country I was afraid existed. My knuckles tapped once, twice. The door opened the width of an eyelash. She stood there. Marisol, and not. Same height, same river-black hair, the same delicate jaw. But the eyes were skittish, unpracticed at lying. "Who are you?" I asked, though the answer was already a storm inside my ribs. The chain scraped. The door tried to retreat. From deeper in the room, a calm voice called, "Isidora, don't hide." The name struck the floor between us like a dropped spoon. I reached for his hand, small and trembling, and felt the same tremor inside myself. "Maybe she's just tired," I whispered, knowing how weak it sounded. He looked at me as if testing whether I believed it. I wanted to protect him from the truth, but I no longer knew what truth meant. The air felt heavy, filled with two voices wearing one face. When he finally asked, "Will she ever be the same?" I couldn't answer. All I managed was a promise I didn't trust anymore. "We'll find out soon, my love." The chain slid free. I stepped into a small room stitched together by care and poverty. A cot with a thin man sleeping, a pieced quilt, a clean bowl, the scent of boiled rice. The other woman, thin, thoughtful, gave me a chair. "I'm Lucy," she said gently. "Please sit." I set the photo on the table. 3 faces smiled up: Stephen, Marisol, Matthew. Isidora's hand trembled toward it and then stopped mid-air, as if a wire had caught her. He told me she hugged him that morning, then scolded him for the same thing she'd praised yesterday. "She looks like Mom," he said quietly, "but sometimes she doesn't sound like her. I'm sorry," she added, as if apology could staple the world back together. "I never meant harm. Medicine is expensive. She said it was simple." I folded the photo closed to stop the smiling. "Simple?" I repeated, almost laughing. "There is nothing simple about living 2 lives in one house." Lucy met my eyes. "Mrs. Brooks, we know this is wrong, but Isidora is not your enemy." I felt the truth tilt. Cruelty wears perfume. Desperation smells like rice and disinfectant. "Tell me everything," I said at last, "and say her name again so I know it's real." "Isidora," Lucy said. The room held still around it, as if a door somewhere had finally opened. Isidora sat with her knees turned inward, hands cupped like she was hiding a small flame. "It began at the market," she said. "I was buying rice, counting coins twice when she touched my elbow. I looked up and thought I'd found a mirror for sale." She gave a helpless laugh that wasn't laughter. She said her name, Marisol, and mine fell out of my mouth before I could hold it. She knew it already. At first it was only minutes. I walked the street. I waved to the lady with the glasses chain. I bought bread and said thank you. She said I did well. The money was clean, or I told myself it was. Isidora's voice thinned. Then she asked me to stay longer, to be at the house while she took a call, she said. Sometimes she came back with perfume that smelled like hotels. Sometimes with flowers she placed where only she could see them. "What about the man?" I asked softly. "The rich one?" The room tightened. Lucy looked away. Isidora nodded once. "I saw him from a distance. She called him Charles. They spoke in a lobby where the floor was too clean to be real. She told me to wait in a car and to keep my head down. When she returned, she smelled like another city. She asked me to go home and be her for an hour. An older woman opened the door before Lucy could knock. Her eyes darted first to Isadora, then to me, and her breath broke in a sound halfway between sob and prayer. "Marisol?" she whispered. Her hands reached forward and then stopped mid-air. Isadora's chin trembled. "No, Mama, it's me. The other one. You look like my daughter-in-law," I said, and my voice did not accuse so much as beg the world to make sense. "Why?" Her eyes filled before her mouth moved. "Because we are. Maybe we are," she faltered. "She pays me to be her sometimes. Market, pickups, small things. I don't ask questions." The thin man coughed in his sleep. The sound was a broken hinge. Isadora flinched. Lucy's hand steadied her shoulder. Stephen would come home expecting peace, and Araceli would walk in wearing her soft smile, believing the world was still fooled. But tonight, they would all see what I had seen. The truth was ready, trembling beneath every spoon and folded napkin. Morning came heavy and grey. I woke before dawn and began to prepare a dinner that wasn't meant for celebration, but for truth. I polished the silverware, set the tablecloth, and lit 2 candles. One for the past, one for what was about to be reborn. The scent of roasted fish filled the house, just as it had on happier days, when laughter still echoed through the walls. The next morning, Lucy led me and Isadora through the back lanes where the air smelled of soap and ashes. She carried a thermos of coffee and a folded note addressed in shaking letters. "Mother, please." The streets thinned into a scatter of cottages with tin roofs that looked like they had been hammered out of old promises. We stopped before one with vines crawling up the window and a wind chime made from spoons. "I was a nurse once," she said, voice thin as thread. "In the maternity ward of San Telmo Hospital. There were twins, 2 baby girls. Their mother died after childbirth, poor thing. The father had already gone missing. I took one home, just for the night, until the church found a place. But then..." Her voice cracked. "The hospital burned 2 weeks later. Records gone. I thought the other one had died." Isidora's eyes shimmered. "But Marisol lived." Rosa nodded slowly, tears running into the corners of her mouth. "Someone must have taken her. Maybe a nurse. Maybe the director. They said an adoption paper appeared. Money exchanged." She glanced at the cot, at the man whose breath rattled like loose shutters. I tried to stop. I told her it was wrong. She brought more money. She brought a blue blouse and said fashion changes. Isidora's eyes found mine, pleading for a verdict I didn't know how to give. "Mrs. Brooks, I swear I never meant harm. I thought I was borrowing her face to buy time. I did not know I was helping her lose it." The woman clutched the doorframe, and her face folded in on itself. "You came back," she murmured, then turned toward the small altar behind her, where 2 candles burned beside a cracked photograph of 2 infants swaddled in blue cloth. "I never thought you would meet." The house smelled of wax, rice, and old paper. A calendar still hung open to 1993. We sat at a table cluttered with sewing needles, prayer cards, and unfinished hems. The woman, Rosa Vega, wiped her hands on her apron and began to speak, not to us, but to time itself. "She bought my rice, then coffee, then a little cake I saved for my parents. She asked about the man on the cot, and I told her he is my father in every way except blood. After that, she said she had a strange idea that could help us both." Isadora swallowed. "She said she sometimes needed to be in 2 places. Just errands. Harmless errands. If I could stand in for her, Walk to the market, greet a neighbor, pick up a child. She would pay for medicine. She promised it would be quick. She promised I would never have to lie with my mouth, only with my back and hair. I felt the words weigh between us, heavy as heirlooms made of silence. The truth was not a straight line, but a circle, looping back through ashes and lies. I took out my notebook and wrote one sentence. 2 daughters, one stolen, one left behind. Rosa poured the coffee, but her hands shook so badly Lucy took the cup for her. You must not hate her, Rosa said softly to Isadora. You both came from the same sorrow. She only forgot which part was hers. Isadora nodded, tears sliding soundlessly down her cheeks. I don't hate her, Mamma, she said. I pity her. She never learned to be one person. Outside, the wind lifted the chimes, and for a moment the spoons played a fragile lullaby. Rosa looked toward the sound and smiled through her tears. You were both meant for light, she whispered. I prayed one day the truth would find you. Now it has. I closed my notebook and stood, heart splitting between grief and awe. Then it's time the truth finds her too, I said. And when it does, it won't come alone. She covered her face. I said no. She said one last time. She said it would be the last. She always said last. Her voice frayed. I told Lucy I hated the money that helped us breathe. I told myself I would confess to you, but I was afraid you would hate me with the same eyes. She lowered her hands, and I saw a young woman whose guilt was fed by love, not malice. I kept your photo on the table, I said, surprising myself with the softness in my own voice, so the smiling wouldn't keep the truth from entering. Isadora nodded like a child before a teacher. If you want me to face the police, I will, she whispered. If you want me to talk in front of your son, I will. Just, please don't let him think I took his mother away. I was her shadow, not her thief. The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that holds a door open for a different life. I heard the city hum beyond the walls, and beneath it, the faint bell of my own vow. No, I said. You will help me end this, not as a shadow, as yourself. We served ourselves. Forks lifted and settled, clinking like small alarms. I waited until their plates were warm with steam, and then placed my notebook beside the salt. Before we eat, I said, we need to bless the truth. Marisol's smile thinned. Stephen's eyes narrowed. Matthew froze, a spoon hovering like a question mark. I opened to a page where my handwriting marched like soldiers. These are the days you were 2 people, I said, looking at Marisol. The days you were sweetness and thunder. The days you wrote with your right hand, and the next with your left. The days you bought bread and forgot to say thank you because it wasn't you. Her face didn't crack, but the air around it did. Evening fell like a curtain. I lit the 2 candles and set the roasted fish in the center, the table shining with a patience that felt older than any of us. Stephen came home first, loosening his tie, reading the room with an architect's eye for stress lines. Looks nice, Mum, he said, but his voice hovered, wary of the quiet. Matthew slipped into his chair, feet swinging, gaze darting between the candles as if they might speak. The door latch clicked again. Marisol stepped in. Soft blouse, soft smile, the same careful choreography she always wore. She kissed Matthew's hair, brushed Stephen's shoulder, and nodded toward me. Smells wonderful, Mamma, she offered, setting her purse beside the blue basket I'd left on the counter. For a heartbeat, the house pretended to be ordinary. If my story reached you, don't let it fade. Share it so another heart finds courage in truth. Every family carries its own silence until someone dares to speak. I used to think truth was only a blade. I know better now. Truth burns, yes, but it also keeps you from freezing. Courage doesn't shout. It straightens chairs, returns spoons, and leaves one lamp on for whoever is late. The past does not disappear. It learns how to sit politely at the edge of the room. When it coughs, we hand it water. The night after leaving Rosa's house, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where lies had once been served with soup and smiles. The notebook lay open before me, filled with every secret that had brought us here. 2 sisters, 1 stolen life. I ran my fingers across the pages and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, the masks fall." I looked at the framed photo of Raphael on the shelf and whispered, "Stay with me tonight." His silent smile seemed to nod from the glass. I closed my eyes, steadying the storm in my chest. Whatever happened, my family would wake to the light, no matter how much it burned. If you are listening from a quiet place of your own, hear me. Do not trade your voice for a short peace. Choose the long, honest peace, the kind that survives night. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is deciding what will steer. We chose light, one small mercy at a time, until the house remembered its song, and this time we sang it together. A gentle knock at the back door answered the silence. I had left it unlatched. Isadora stepped in first, followed by Lucy. For a long second, the room doubled. 2 faces, 1 life split between them. Matthew stood so fast his chair squealed. "Why is there 2?" he whispered. Stephen's jaw opened and didn't know where to land. Marisol's voice went low and bright. "What is this performance?" She shot a look at me as if I'd smuggled thunder into her kitchen. "You're frightening the boy." "I'm frightening no one," I said, keeping my hands steady on the table edge. "I'm ending a performance." I nodded at Isadora. As the sun leaned low, I stood beside the gate, watching the candles flicker inside the house. It no longer felt haunted. It felt like a song that had finally learned its melody. Isadora kissed Matthew's forehead and joined Stephen beneath the soft dusk light. The ring caught the glow, not gold, but something warmer, a promise mended in full. "You brought the light back," he said, his voice breaking into the hush. Not with words, but with quiet. Isadora's eyes filled. She didn't reach for the ring right away. She looked at Matthew, at me, then back to Stephen. "Only if we build this light together?" she whispered. He nodded, as though he'd been waiting to breathe. For the first time, something flinched behind her gaze. Stephen's voice softened and sharpened at once. "Is there someone else?" The candles hissed, as if rain had touched their wicks. Marisol's silence became the loudest sound in the room. I placed the blue basket on the table, turned so the fresh paint caught the light. "You once asked me to believe your smile," I said. "Tonight, believe my eyes." I lifted the notebook again, but it was Stephen who set his hand over mine. "Enough paper," he said. He looked at Marisol. "Say it." Her chin tipped upward, beautiful and brittle. "Yes," she said. The word cut clean. "There is someone. There has been for a while." Matthew's breath hitched. The room felt suddenly too small for air. "His name is Charles," I said quietly, and Marisol's lips pressed into a line that admitted everything. Isadora didn't look at Marisol. She looked at Matthew. "Little one," she said softly. "I am the shadow that should never have been in your house." Matthew's eyes clouded. "But you looked like my mum," he said. "Sometimes you sounded kinder." His voice broke on the last word. Stephen dragged a hand across his face. "Explain," he said to Marisol. "Not unkind, not yet." The room waited for her to choose a truth. She chose a blade. Do you want drama? She snapped. Fine. I needed help. Everyone needs help. She helped me. And now you all want to crucify me for being efficient? Lucy stepped forward, calm as a metronome. Efficient is when errands are shared, she said. Deception is when a life is split to hide another life. Marisol's eyes flashed. You don't know our house, she said. You don't know our needs. I know the perfume of hotels, I answered. And the flowers you placed where only you could see them. The house breathes differently now, like a chest that has finally finished crying. Morning light comes in without tiptoeing. It lays itself across the table, Raphael sanded, and warms the grain where our hard days once cooled. Stephen leaves with coffee he actually tastes. Matthew wakes before his alarm to finish a drawing of a bird that isn't flying away, but circling home. Isidora hums while watering the roses, and the soil drinks without complaint. It happened one quiet evening, the kind when even the wind sounds shy. Stephen stood in the living room with something small and bright in his trembling hand. The air carried the smell of soup and crayons, and Isidora was laughing softly at Matthew, who had spilled glitter across the table. When Stephen called her name, she turned, her laughter still hanging between them like a bell waiting to be answered. He knelt, awkward, honest, terrified, and held out a ring that had once belonged to a lie but now gleamed like forgiveness. When the day of their wedding came, the yard smelled of roses and rain-soaked earth. Matthew wore a little suit that didn't quite fit and insisted on holding both their hands as they said their vows. Ivan flew in from his route and clapped his brother's back until both were laughing again. The guests were few, the joy unashamed. Tell me where you're watching from and what part of this journey touched you most. Your words are the light that keeps these stories alive, and maybe, just maybe, they'll guide another lost soul home. I told myself it was a blessing, that she had a better life. I had no husband, no money, no roof without leaks. I raised you, Isidora, the best I could. I told myself the other child was safe somewhere richer. But when you turned 25, I saw her face in the newspaper. Wedding announcement. Perfect dress. Same dimple. She turned to me now, eyes imploring. I wrote letters to her family. None came back. Maybe she never saw them. Or maybe she didn't want to. Isidora took her hand. She knew nothing about you, she whispered. I think she believed she was an only child, and maybe that's what made her so hungry for being seen. I wanted more, she said, almost pleading with the wall. More than this neighborhood, more than this table, more than the way your mother counts our spoons. That table fed you, I said. These spoons taught a child to eat. And I taught myself to live, she answered, lifting her chin again. Don't pretend your smallness is a virtue. Stephen leaned back, as if distance could stitch him together. And the twin? He asked, voice stunned and tired. You hired her to be you. To be the part of me that didn't matter, Marisol said. The part that buys cilantro and smiles at neighbors. Isidora finally looked at her sister. I sold time to you, she said quietly, but you sold yourself. The sentence lay on the table, one more place setting no one had asked for. Matthew's whisper touched my sleeve. Grandma, which one goes home tonight? I gathered him into my side. The truth, I said. Only the truth goes home. I turned to Stephen. Son, this house cannot hold two faces for one life. Stephen stood, eyes rimmed with a grief that had already begun to harden. Marisol, he said, and his voice was the sound of a door deciding. Take your things. The candles bent toward their own smoke. In the quiet, Chairs breathed back from the table. The silver remembered how to be still. And the house, finally, stopped pretending.